Welcome to Our Savior's Faith Stories. Today we hear from Diane Lambrecht. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing a part of your faith with us today. I know you've been a teacher for most of your career and volunteered often here with Christian education. So you have a good understanding of what it is to pass our faith down from generation to generation. And so today I was wondering if you would share with us how that faith has been passed on to you and how you describe it as the threads of faith that go from generation to generation. So can you tell me a little bit about your family and ancestors and how that's shaped you?
Well, when I agreed to do this and I chose the topic of the journeys of faith through your family, it took a lot of time for me to think about where those threads were, where they started, and where they're going to continue. So the best way to do it, I think, is to tell some of the stories of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And my family is 100% Norwegian, and they came, pretty much all of them came around the Civil War or a little bit after it, so nobody served in the military. And they came from diverse backgrounds. Some of my family were tenant farmers and very, very poor. And my one quick story is when I visited Norway once a long, long time ago, I was ruminating about how people could leave such a beautiful area. And there was a young couple sitting having a picnic right adjacent to us, and he overheard me, and he said, "Ma'am, because you can't eat rocks." And that stuck with me, so that these people who came all this distance to America with dreams and hopes and faith, some of it was because of desperation. Some of my family had a trade. My great-grandfather was a shoemaker, so his job was a little bit easier when he came to the United States. But I was thinking about how that thread of faith was coming through, and here are the stories that I have to tell. Is that I knew my great-grandmother until I was about 12 or 13. She lived a very long life, and she told of her mother. Her name was Aslug Bjornstad, and what she told them when they came down through the mountains after selling everything and getting steerage on this huge ship to take them to this new land of opportunity. And she said that my great-great-grandmother, she had everything ready to go with the entire family, and they got on the ship, and the first day they put out the sails and the wind died. The same thing happened on the second day. And she looked at everyone and she said, "If the wind doesn't blow on the third day, the Lord wants me to stay home." But on the third day, the wind was great, and the rest is history. They came to America and never looked back. And there we have all the Bibles and the devotionals and whatever to pass on to the next generation with that thread of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And on my father's side of the family, there they came with a little bit more means, but they came with a very, very strong faith. And one of the first things they did was put aside money with a group of immigrants to build a church. And that church is still in existence, and we use it in the summer. And when I go into the cemetery, I see all these wonderful saints who have passed, who have spread the faith, passed the thread along. And I think of Peter being the rock of faith. And my father would tell me that they did the building in the winter, his grandfather told him, because it was easier to cut those blocks of limestone and slide them down the bluffs on sleds. And one of the last stories my dad told me about his grandfather is that he died in the winter. And they wanted to make certain that he could be buried from the church. So they waited until the weather was nice and cold, so the bluffs and the roads would be slippery. And my dad remembers putting his shoulders on the sled to help that caisson come down the bluffs so that he could be buried at the church.
Wow. Such commitment.
And that was something my dad just always kind of remembered these things. And that was one because he was a young boy, and to put his shoulder to try and keep those horses so that nothing would run away as they brought the caisson down the bluffs. And anybody who's been to southeastern Minnesota, where I'm from, knows that they're not just hills. They're very, very steep bluffs. And in the archives of Washington, D.C., they're actually called the Yucatan Mountains. So it was an endeavor to do that.
Could you tell us the town and then the name of that church?
Yes, I'm from southeastern Minnesota, and the community that I'm from is Houston, and the church is the Stone Church, about 3 or 4 miles outside of town.
Okay.
And when they ring the bell in the summer for church to tell everybody it's starting, you can just hear the ring of faith ricocheting through those bluffs, and it's just a wonderful sound, and you can remember all these wonderful people.
So you had a couple of stories, your faith goes way back with these ancestors that came from Norway. You had a couple of stories about your parents and the way they lived their faith that you didn't even know about when you were growing up, but
Right.
how really in many ways that still influences you.
Well, and like I was discussing, is that with Walter Mondale passing in just the last few days and the eulogies that have been in the paper about him, the one thing that ran true with me with his Norwegian ancestry is that he was always taught when he was raised in Elmore, Minnesota, that first of all, you must be respectful and no lying. And the second the second thing is that you must not boast. That boasting, and that was something that I was raised with too. And I always did it and didn't understand until I'm so much older that that's the story of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And Jesus said, we don't need this boasting and showing everything.
Yes.
Just do what you need to do because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And there's nothing better in faith than that. So my father was a construction worker, and he had a very difficult and dangerous job because he was self-taught, but he did all the explosives technician work for a construction company, for building roads, for working in stone quarries and things like that. And one of the stories I learned about his faith and not boasting and not telling anyone is that after his younger sister died an untimely death and left small children, no matter where he was working, no matter how far he had to drive, when he was coming home at night, he would always find his way to that family home, and he would check to see if everyone was okay. And many times he would bring them groceries. And he never, ever said anything about that to anyone until my youngest cousin mentioned it to me a couple years ago.
Wow.
And so there, it's like, don't be boastful, but keep that faith going and show it. Don't talk about it. And on that same side of the coin, after my mother passed away, I was going through a bunch of the newspapers and things that she had collected, and I had forgotten what she had said when she was chosen as the Houston County Volunteer of the Year. I mean, she was one of those giving, faithful people. And she said to the newspaper, but she never said it to us, well, my husband had a very, very dangerous job. And every morning before he left, I would ask the Lord to bring him home safely because he had 3 young children. And to me, it was just my dad, and it was a job that he did.
Right.
Mom never mentioned anything about it, but her faith was so strong, and that's what she did. She said every single morning.
So you have really had the blessing of having had these ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, of people who just didn't talk their faith. They lived their faith in how they helped each other, their prayer life, what you see written in their Bibles, even, having the story of those early immigrants who set aside money to build the churches. I mean, so...
Well, and people probably don't realize that those immigrants from Houston County were also down in the counties in Iowa. And those are the immigrants that built Decorah College, Luther College. Those are the immigrants who built our church in Houston, but also are the immigrant families that built Decorah, the Luther College in Decorah. And those that didn't have any land available to them took a huge wagon train straight up north to the Red River Valley, and they built Concordia College.
Wow.
So there's a really strong connection of the faith of who those Norwegian immigrants were.
So now in your own life, what does your faith mean to you? I mean, how is it shape your life?
It's kind of like the bedrock, but it's something that you don't necessarily show, and you don't necessarily talk about it. It's just the feeling that you have and the way you try to live your life.
And about who you are.
And who you are.
Yeah.
And you try to do what you need to do, and nobody really needs to notice it, but they feel it.
I like that.
If that makes any sense.
I really like that. I think that's very important. It's not so much they notice it, but they feel it. That's what they remember, is that feeling.
And I think the challenge when you get to be my age and you look back and you reflect, you have to look forward and you try to see if you're pulling that thread forward. If you're doing what you need to do to pass it on to the next generation. And I was thinking when I was packing things and getting ready to move from our house, and I have these beautiful leather-bound Bibles with all the Norwegian inscriptions in it and some family history that I can't read. I'm thinking, how and when do I pass that on to my grandchildren that they know the significance for the next generation?
Right. Yes.
It's a heavy load.
It is a heavy load. I was blessed to receive the old Norwegian Bible in my family that my dad gave me when I was ordained. And so I feel that same strong connection with you of who I am today is so much about those people before me, many of them whom I don't even know.
No.
So, and I know you won't say this because this will be like bragging for you or boasting, but I can see in the way you've worked with children throughout your life and the many different ways you've worked and volunteered at Our Savior's that you have lived that, of keeping that thread of faith going, not only to your own family, but to, countless families. Sunday school children you taught, and menagerie trips that you chaperoned.
And the number of church services we went to in various towns, leaving at 5 a.m.
Yes. So that is how we continue that thread of faith, and we do it because it's something in our heart that we know how important it is.
And we can only hope and pray that it comes to fruition.
Right. We plant the seeds.
We plant the seeds.
And you actually said that to me before we really began, is all of the seeds that your ancestors planted and how that comes to fruition.
And brings hope for the future. And, of course, with the issues we have with immigration now, we just have to hope and pray for the future generations.
Right, that we keep living it and passing that on. Is there anything else you'd like to share about faith today with?
The only thing that I say, and I've said this to numerous people as we go through the trials and tribulations of life, is that I do not understand how people can make it through the trials and tribulations if they don't have the faith.
Right.
I don't understand it.
That's your bedrock, as you said, your strength. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for sharing that about how faith is passed on from generation to generation. I think it's so important and also incredibly interesting to hear the stories of how that's been passed on.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.